Perfect. Right. So, long time coming, long time coming, finally. And we meant to do this last week. So, thank you very much for your patience with that. That was
Okay.
a nightmare. Unfortunately, I was, we got asked to go last minute to our friends. They eloped in Portugal.
Cool.
So, I had like had to go over there, and I was working out of like an Airbnb, and the internet was just terrible. So thanks for postponing it a week.
It's all
But
good, man.
Alex, welcome to the show. And I think this is, I mean, I've been looking to probably talk to you for a couple of years, and a lot's gone on in those last 2 years. So we've probably got a lot more to talk about. But how have you been?
Busy, man. These last 6 months have been some of the toughest of my life too, just for a lot of personal reasons and relationships with family members. Like everyone knows that me and my mom like rose up in this space together, but my mom and I haven't spoken to each other in 6 months. So it's a lot
Really?
of a lot of family stuff I'm sorting through.
Really? Is that well, I'd like to say, is that repairable? Do you think?
I think it's repairable. We just need to give each other space for some time.
Okay, yeah. And was it about things? Was it about health stuff?
No, it was about just like past stuff that sort of came to the surface and
Okay.
re-triggered a lot of things. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough, man. Yeah, because I was gonna say, yeah, you and your mum were, always sort of the Zeck name going back and forth on Instagram or on Twitter. I think I actually come across your mum first, and I think that was like your background in natural health comes from your mum's, or your background promoting natural health comes from your mum's health issues, correct?
Yeah, yeah. So it came from my mom originally, and then um, after we saw my mom begin to heal when she adopted the pseudoscientific approach of Dr. Kelly Brogan, my wife, who I just married at the time, 9 years prior, was diagnosed with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis,
Mm.
was chronically ill, had seen multiple rheumatologists, was told that she was always going to be this way. We even had conversations about her not being able to ever have kids, possibly, and that she was going to be in a wheelchair by the time she was 40, that, you know, she might not live as long as me, all of these conversations. And then after we saw my mom begin to heal with this natural approach to health, we tried the same for my wife, tapered her off all of her autoimmune medications, and she felt better in 4 months time. And we went to a rheumatologist to get blood work checked, and sure enough, her inflammation levels had dropped to normal for the first time in nearly 10 years. And so that kind of did it for me. Those two examples put me into a lot of cognizance. How could these two people I love be under the care of the experts, right? Be perpetually ill, and then as soon as they step away and listen to someone who the experts refer to as a pseudoscientific quack that spreads misinformation, that's when they began to heal. So I started a journey of questioning everything in my life. And at the time, I had just commissioned as an officer in 2016. So, right when I began a job working for the government in the military, that's when I began questioning everything. So, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's funny actually. I've had one of my friends who I met on one of the marches last year. He had an awakening while he was serving for the army in the United Kingdom, and it was like a few of them sort of woke up at the same time. But in that environment, that's quite a hard place. So you're basically doing the dirty work for all the people you later realize are the worst people on the planet,
Yeah.
and yeah, you're just dispensable to them. And this is one of the things that I have a problem. I don't understand, like when you see Davos right now and the police that are going for these people, how they can how they can even do that, knowing what they're doing in terms of like, I get that they're getting paid, but surely that hurts your soul. you know.
Amen. Yeah. And it's different for each person. Like for some people, I mean, I'll give you an example. Before COVID, I was aware of all the problems with the army, knew that 9/11 was a complete fraud, knew that all of the wars that we had fought in, at the least in the last 20, 30, 40 years, were all on fraudulent premises. Um, but even knowing that, I was comfortable receiving the compensation that I was receiving in the army. I was paid very well as an officer. And I thought, okay, well, if I can just find a job within the army that is non-combat related and just switch over to that, then I can make sense of it in my head that it's okay to do this. It's okay to be a part of this very harmful system, just as long as I, remain within it, remain in a job where I'm not causing direct harm. And luckily, COVID happened, and that forced me to wake up, so to speak, even further. And that's when I kind of realized there's no chance I'm maintaining any job or relationship to this corrupt system at all. There's no way.
So only as little as like 2 and a bit years ago, you were still an officer in the army.
I was an officer in the army 13 months ago. That was my last day in the army was April 29th, 2021.
Right, I didn't realize. I didn't realize, especially with the stuff you were saying on
Yeah.
Instagram. I didn't think.
Well, so that's the thing, is that most people didn't realize I was in the army because I didn't advertise that I was, and I actually wanted to keep it quiet that I was in the army. Not, if people ask like, "Hey, are you in the army?" I just found this thing on Google. I mean, I was in this program in the army for 2 years called the World Class Athlete Program, and training as a an Olympic athlete for 2 years. It's a special program that the army has. But anyway, you could find my profile pretty easily if you just like Googled me and scrolled down a little bit. So I had a few people who would reach out and say, "Hey, are you still in the army? I see that like this thing says you were in the World Class Athlete Program." I'd say, "Yes, I'm still in the army. Just please keep it quiet because I'm trying not to get in trouble." So
Yeah, I can imagine. What was your world class athlete in terms of what
yeah.
was the program for?
So I played team handball for
Oh,
the
okay,
U.S. national team. Yeah, I did that for 2 years for the 2020 Olympic qualification period, but we lost in the Pan American Games to Argentina and Chile. So
right.
as soon as you're no longer in contention for the Olympics, no matter what sport you're in, then it's right back to a normal job in the army. So as soon as we lost, I was right back to a normal job. But being in that program also, again, prior to COVID, afforded me an opportunity to do a lot more internal work because I didn't have to wear a uniform. I literally trained as an athlete for 2 years straight, played professionally in Germany for a little bit, and that was my job. And it afforded me a lot more time for introspection and understanding my place in the world, and that sort of deepened my desire to get out. But I still didn't have like a moment that I knew for sure I was going to leave the army until COVID hit. And then I was like, okay, yep, this is it. I'm done with this. I'm not doing this anymore.
That's interesting. I mean, it's well, even you saying that you had more time for introspection, etc. That's not generally something I come across people in the army. They are constantly busy trying to shut that out.
And it's not like that for a purpose.
Yeah,
There's a
yeah.
reason.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I remember talking to, I think it was Dr. Jess about it, where she was saying it's one of those things, the same as the medical industry, the way it's done, the doctors all stepping over each other to get to the top, no sleep, don't really get to think, not about their patients, just talking about who can get higher. I mean, the programs, I've been watching it years ago, I think it was Grey's Anatomy at the time, and that sort of documents it. They don't really care. They're just trying to get ahead of their next person they're competing with. And the patient, it's like, I've had doctors say to me, they've messaged me and said, Ryan, I've finally come over to this side because I looked at it and thought how many people I'm actually helping. None of them. They keep coming back. I keep on giving them more drugs and nothing changes except for the amount of drugs they're on. But the fact you even did that shows you were ahead of your time, or sort of like more aware than most. But
Yeah.
which is sort of you're, it's like your soul sort of pushing you back. I mean, I remember reading a book once, and it said like whenever you come off path, something happen, it'll just push you back into your path. So that's interesting. And handball, I know about it because of the Olympics, but I think it's pretty big in Europe. It's not so big in the UK.
No, it's not big in the US at all. So this is a funny
Yeah.
story. So I was a big basketball player growing up. Like basketball was my life. And in the United States, as you know, university athletics are a really, really big deal. And the only Division 1, which is like the highest level of college athletics, the
Yeah.
only Division 1 school to recruit me for basketball was the United States Military Academy at West Point.
Right.
So because they were the only Division 1 school to recruit me, that's where I decided I wanted to go. And as soon as I get to West Point, I get cut from the basketball team like within the first month of being there. So because the way that college athletics typically works is they have scholarships that they offer players, and they only recruit a certain amount of players. But with West Point and the other military academies, because everyone at the school, regardless, is technically on some sort of scholarship. It's not really a scholarship, it's that they're paid for by the government, right? They're all there, um, paid for by the government. You have to be qualified academically to get in regardless. All of the sports teams, they don't have scholarships to worry about, so they can over recruit. So for my recruiting class for basketball, there are 12 of us,
Wow.
and several of us got cut pretty instantly. And then after that, I was playing pickup basketball in the gym, and the senior. So I was a freshman. The senior approached me and said, "Hey, you should come try out for handball." And I was like, handball, what is that? No, I'm not doing that. I've never even heard of it. He said, I promise you it's not what you think it is. You need to come try out. You're going to love it. All the dudes that get cut from basketball, football, baseball, lacrosse, or soccer, they come play handball. I was like, okay, I'll go check it out. So I went and tried out for the handball team. Liked it. There's a bunch of athletic dudes who came from other sports, didn't really know what they were doing playing this sport, but I got good enough my junior year to where a U.S. national team coach saw me play and asked me to be on the U.S. national team. And I said, I can't. I have to be in the Army. Like, that's not possible. And he said, no, it is possible. There's a program in the Army called the World Class Athlete Program, where if you're on a U.S. national team for any of the Olympic sports, you do that full time for Olympic qualification period. So after I commissioned in 2016 as an officer, I spent 6 months at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, doing field artillery training, a year at Fort Riley, Kansas. Never had to deploy or anything like that. Just did a lot of garrison time, which means just time at like a home station doing, training. I did do field artillery training, but never went to combat. And then after that year, I applied to the World Class Athlete Program, got in, did that for 2 years, and then went back for an additional year to do another field artillery school. And that's when COVID happened, and I knew I was getting out of the Army, so I got out as quick as I could.
Oh, interesting. No, I've seen. I know it's like it's quite athletic, Campbell. What I've seen of it, it's like yeah, it's like football with your hands, basically. Correct. It's just
Yeah, it's exactly like, yeah, like football or like soccer with your hands, or water polo on
yeah,
land, or you could say it's
basketball
like
with your hand.
basketball, except for there's a goal on the ground with a goalie instead of a hoop in the air.
Yeah.
But yeah, you need to be able to run fast, jump high. You need to be very aggressive. You need to be able to hit on defense. So,
Oh, it's contact, is it? Is it
oh
contact?
yeah, you can hand check on defense. You
All
can
right.
wrap people up. You're just not supposed to take them to the ground. But it happens
All
quite a
right.
bit.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But men in any situation like that, it happens. It's like when you're trying to play. I used to play rugby, like basically professionally, and whenever I used to train, it'd be like I was just doing touch grab. That lasts about 2 seconds before
Yeah.
like, everyone starts hitting the head out of
I
each
was
other.
friends with a lot of rugby guys.
Yeah.
So there's West Point, the university I went to, has a really big rugby program too. So a lot of my best friends were rugby players. They're tough guys.
Yeah, West Point's quite. I mean, it's even for someone from the UK, like you know about West Point. It's quite a famous place. But that's interesting. So you were getting out when you had to get out of that, Alex. Is it quite? I mean, are you contracted to a certain amount of time? Like, could you just say I'm
Yeah.
quitting and I'm leaving, or like?
Yeah, so the way it works after you commission as an officer in from West Point is you have to serve a minimum of 5 years active duty to essentially pay back your tuition for being at the university, because it is, again, in normie land, it is a high quality education, a lot of it high quality indoctrination. But I am appreciative of many aspects um, of West Point in hindsight. I think when I got out of the Army after serving my minimum of 5 years, I sort of threw all of it away. Like you probably saw I was growing my hair out super long, and I like had a big beard, and I was just like, F the Army. And I still think that the Army is an extremely corrupt organization, but with all of the bad parts of the Army, I threw out some of the good things. And I'm in reflecting now, realizing that there was a lot of positive things that I was taught at West Point. I was taught how to persevere through really tough situations.
Mhm.
I was taught critical thinking skills, which is ironic because somehow the majority of my classmates and other people who graduate from West Point have succumbed to this lack of critical thinking. I was taught morals, which is ironic as well, given what the Army does.
Morals and
But
ethics are slightly they're different, right? But I'll let you carry on.
yeah, so yeah, exactly. But I there's just many positive things I was taught, and I majored in systems engineering. That's the degree that I got. And systems engineering teaches you how to link together multiple seemingly unrelated things to form an optimal solution. And with systems engineering, that's actually what has allowed me to see uh how all of these things with what's going on in the world are connected, and some of them may be seemingly like not connected, but they're all ultimately for an optimal solution for them, which is the Great Reset or Agenda 2030, whatever you want to call it. So it's
What you want about? There's just been a virus that's gone around, and we've had to like all go in our homes for 2 years. Otherwise, we'd be, we'll be dead. Can't you
yeah,
see all the bodies on the floor outside? You
yeah.
can't walk out the street because there's so many bodies on the floor. I don't know what you're on about, Alex. I mean, you're just in that case.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny though, just on the virus thing. I used to think that like for the first 6 months of
Really?
COVID, um, let me back up a little bit. So in November of 2019,
Mm-hmm.
again, I was still in the army.
Between
I
19.
saw I had already woken up to pharmaceutical corruption. I had already woken up to the fraud of vaccines. I had already woken up to government corruption, 9/11, all of the things, right? I had not ever explored terrain versus germ theory ever,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in November of 2019, I was on just following on some Reddit subs and watching people talk about how a bunch of people were dropping dead in the streets in China. And I was watching this from November to December and like seeing these crazy videos and seeing that our mainstream news wasn't picking up on it. And I knew that our mainstream news was corrupt. So I was like, oh my God, they're not talking about this on purpose because they did successfully create a bioweapon in a lab and it's going to kill millions and millions of people. But even though I was completely wrong with that, I knew that the end game was for mandatory vaccines. That's the reason, that's the purpose for what they did or did not do. And then I saw a video in April of 2021 or April of 2020, sorry, April of 2020. And at this point, I was observing my reality and like, this, I don't see anyone dropping dead. Like, what? Oh my God, those were propaganda videos from the Chinese government, more than likely. And then I was like, okay, so this virus isn't that bad. That's what I was thinking, right? And I had known that, okay, like people who are mindful of their health and approach health from a natural lens are typically don't have any issues with viruses or bacteria. That's what I thought at the time. And then this video that I saw in April of 2021, or sorry, April of 2020. These last 2 years have been gone
Oh, no,
by so
yeah.
fast.
The
April of
last year.
2020. Yeah. Shit. So April of 2020, I saw a video from Dr. Tom Cowan where
Yeah,
he was describing something to the effect of if you were following a pod of dolphins off the coast of Florida and
yeah.
you noticed that the dolphins started getting sick and dying, what would be your first thought? And someone in the audience yelled, "Who put some shit in the water?" And it's like, yeah, exactly. That would be your first thought. You wouldn't think, oh, what virus is killing these dolphins? And I was like, damn, that's interesting. And I started thinking about other examples of animals. I'm like, is there ever really any examples in the wild where like animals get sick and die in mass because of a so-called virus? And I was thinking, and there's some examples that popped up, and I started looking into them. I'm like, well, really, it's that those animals were starved of their food or their habitat was destroyed or there was a toxic chemical leak that was put there because of human beings. I'm like, I couldn't really find one example where animals were dying in mass for reasons that you couldn't equate to something aside from a virus, right? Like, so I was like, there's always other issues at play here, like they're being starved or they're being poisoned. Is it really a virus? And I started looking into it a little bit more. I'm still pretty undecided, um, especially when I heard someone, I think it was someone responded to me on Twitter, there's no such thing as viruses. I was like, that sounds like the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my life. But I'm an open guy. So I said, fuck it. Let's go look. Let's see if there's any validity to this. And I started exploring pretty heavily. I had Dr. Count on my podcast, and I would, start talking about how SARS-CoV-2 had never been isolated or proven to exist. Only that one, though, not knowing that it applied to all other viruses. And I would just spout out, just regurgitate what I hear from other people, but I never actually explored it myself, which is ironic because I was so, maybe not as much at the time, but now I'm so big on people sharing their authentic perspective, but really exploring a topic for themselves to where they know it in and out, and they can actually argue it. Because if not, then they're just regurgitating what they've heard from someone else. And that's what I was doing, because I would talk about that on Twitter and elsewhere, and people would say, well, here's a paper where it says they've been isolated. And I would be like, oh shit, I don't know how to read this. Maybe I'm wrong. Oh my God, Dr. Cowan, look at this. And I had sent Dr. Cowan a few studies, and he would always highlight exactly where it was like the process for which they isolate a virus was completely pseudoscientific. And after a while, he finally said, Alec, you are smart enough to figure this out yourself. You can do it. You figure it out. You learn the material, you read all these things, and you determine whether they've properly isolated on any of these. So I did. And I learned the ins and outs of the methodology for which virologists isolate, or so-called isolate, viruses. And I have come to the conclusion now that there is absolutely no science backing any aspect of virology. And that applies for every single virus, and no virus in history has ever been proven to exist or proven to cause disease, which can be a pretty shocking statement for some people to hear, but I can back that up with tons of logic and evidence.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, this is something that even so, backing it up, I'd always known, I mean, been doing this for a long time. I don't know when it was your mum and your wife went through that.
2016.
2016, right? So I've been doing this for about been in this world for 13 years. So it's
Oh,
been,
wow.
yeah. I mean, because I went for my own illness. That's why for 5 years the medical industry almost destroyed me, and I learned the hard way. Found my first mentor. He opened my eyes up to a world I didn't know existed. And once again, you put on that thread, and you're like, oh, food, oh, chemicals, oh, the world, and it's like, right. And so, oh, everything they say is bullshit. Oh, right. And it's like, and you got to be careful with that, because you don't want to, because yeah, you've got to have critical thinking and still think, you don't want to think everything's bullshit. But when all they do is propagate bullshit and nonsense, and they have a track record for it, then it's just like, it's laughable, like this nonsense they're trying to put out now. And it's like, right, it's like you've got to be basically, brain dead to believe anything they come out with now. It's just everything they say. But I've always had so from my own illness, I knew like germ theory versus terrain theory. Louis Pasteur, even on his deathbed, said, the germ is nothing, the terrain is everything. And even with that, though, I used to, before this, still had the idea of, protozoa, funguses, bacteria, and viruses all being a similar thing. It wasn't, even though I had looked into the work of like Andreas van der Planet and a few other people that mentioned about viruses being solvents, etc., or the body actually creating them, because it's really interesting. Because even though I'd read things like that, I'd still been in the world of certain biological medicines, even energy medicines that look at viruses in a certain way, which is, for me, thinking that they're just naming something completely wrong as a virus rather than actually a specific, whatever
Cellular debris. That's
cellular
purely
debris.
what I call it. Cellular debris.
Cellular debris. So this is like where it gets really interesting when it comes to people, because people, it's like I always say to people, okay, simple one to say to people, why don't antibiotics work on a virus? And they're like, well, because it's not bacteria. I'm saying, well, what is bacteria that a virus isn't? It's alive. Bacteria is alive. Viruses don't have a nucleus. They don't respire. They are not alive. And so how can something that's not alive find its way across or whatever? And it can't. It's not alive. Yeah. So this is on a simple basis, right? And so
Yep.
And so this is, even for me, when I dug into that, like you, I come across Dr. Cowan's video with the dolphins and more things. And I was like, this is interesting. I looked more into Andreas van der Planet's work, looked more into Stefan Lanker's work, who talked about the measles virus, which I'm sure you did. And even recently, he's come out and said having a degree in virology biology. It's like having a degree in unicorn.
It is.
Yeah, like mythology. Yeah, and so I want you to go into it because for people out there, we've talked about it a little bit, but there's like a certain thing when you say this is how certain people, or most of the world, to be honest with you, Alex, like they only know what they've been taught, and what they've been taught is a lot of nonsense because they're listening to the mainstream. But when you go a bit deeper and you'll say, okay, well, tell me how they isolate a virus. And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
I do. I can break it down for you if you want. But go, you finish your, because this is, I've looked through and you've got your website, Health Freedom for Humanity, which I want to get into later. But on your website, and I think you posted this a little bit ago on Twitter, which I was looking for a few weeks ago, but you've been banned again. I believe.
It was deleted again.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I was like, fuck's sake. It was only a week ago we were speaking on it.
No.
But you put the article out, The Way Forward, which is a really good article which goes into it. So in that, you explain more about this, which if you can for the audience, I want you to go into.
Yeah. Can you allow me to share my screen if you just click on the bottom, the little arrow right above screen sharing and say allow multiple participants to share?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, because this will be helpful to have.
I think I've done mine by accident. 1 second.
Yep. Yeah. Just if you just click at the top and click stop, and then it'll.
Okay. Oh,
Here.
stop. Yeah, got you. Right.
And I'll show you mine. Here we go.
There you go.
All right.
Here we go.
This is something I've been working on for quite some time. And I've given this presentation at a few different conferences lately, and people have said this is the best explanation of the fraud of virology they've seen. So I decided actually on Monday, so a few days from now, myself and a few other people, I don't know if you saw the video we put out on virology's unproven assumptions or our rebuttal to Malone, McCullough, and Ryan Cole. But the same guys that did those videos with me, are going to do a more expanded version of this presentation that we're working on right now. So this is only 25 slides. The one we're working on is like 45 slides, and we're going to record it on Monday. And I think it's going to be the first video that is going to be distributed publicly to everyone that breaks down the fraud in every single aspect. So we're
also
really
make sure you send that to me. And also I'd love to get, because this is the thing as well, Alec, right? This is the thing as well. I'd love to get you guys and them on a podcast and be like, let's have a chat. But it's like these things never really happen. It's like
I've tried. I've actually tried. I have no problem sharing this publicly. So before I start on this, I tried to set up a debate between a virologist who's published. I'll not share his name just for anonymity's sake, and then also, let's say, an expert on this side of the spectrum. And we had an initial conversation for roughly 45 minutes. And the virologist assumed that our argument was that, yes, we believe these particles exist, that we acknowledge they exist, but we're simply saying that they're not pathogenic. And when he understood really what we are arguing, that you have no proof that these particles exist in nature, that you're making a lot of assumptions in your isolation methods, that your isolation methods are completely pseudoscientific and do not strictly adhere to the scientific method, it was clear that him, and as well as many other virologists, probably have just never been taught to question their initial premise or their protocol for which they, quote, isolate viruses. Just like any of us who are taught anything in school, taught to accept something as fact, we would never go against that. We like doctors, as an example, have been taught to question that vaccines are safe and effective. So they would never think to question that initial premise, right? Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with virologists. And so we gave it a month for him to review some of the material that we sent him, and he sent some papers that our side had already seen multiple times, and we highlighted where the papers did not prove the existence of viruses by strictly following a scientific method. And we are trying to establish debate parameters 2 weeks prior to the debate taking place. And we said that the parameters would be each participant has to send any material they'd be arguing a week prior to. He agreed to that. Both sides agreed. But when we said that the debate question would be, do the Vero cell culture isolation methods and the in silico genomic sequencing prove the existence of SARS-CoV-2? And he said that first, science doesn't prove anything. And we were like, okay, yes, I guess you could say that's true, but you're using this so-called evidence to flip the entire world upside down. So we think this is still an important topic. And he responded with, well, I think that debating on these premises would end up in an unproductive semantics argument. So I don't think that these are good debate questions. And we were like, okay, semantics, you mean the meaning of words? Yeah, that's a big deal. So he ended up backing out because he thought that it would be unproductive to argue on that basis. So it was really eye-opening for me. And it just showed again that virologists are, for the most part, well-intentioned people that are just misinterpreting this and have never been taught to question their procedures. That's simply it. So with that,
100%. Keep that there. I've had someone very, very smart. I was talking to him very recently, and he was like, I've had the symptoms. I was saying, but this has never been proven to exist. If you look it down, he's like, well, how do you explain me having all the symptoms, etc.? And I said, well, the symptoms are the same as a common cold. He's like, well, they don't say this about, loss of taste, loss of smell. I'm like, it does. It says it right there in the common cold.
Yep.
And she's, but we've got the proof it comes from a biolab, etc., etc. I was like, well, what you're saying,
define proof.
Yeah.
Patents proof, or papers proof. Proof is actually seeing the thing, having the thing, and proving it causes disease in a healthy person. That is proof, and they've never done that. And I'm happy to share in this present. And it's so often people will say, "Well, I was sick, so the virus must be real," and that isn't affirming the consequent logical fallacy, because you're pointing to the effects of something as proof for the cause, and you've never actually proven the existence of the supposed cause. So pointing to effects, pointing to disease symptoms and saying this is proof of a virus is actually pseudoscientific and illogical and a logical fallacy.
Well, it's the same as people go away for 2 weeks on holiday, they eat what they want, they drink what they want, they don't get enough sleep, and then they come back and they get ill and they go, oh, I must have caught a bug on the plane. It was that bug. I'm like, no, you've been drinking tons of alcohol. You haven't slept. You've been eating nothing but rubbish food, ice creams, everything else. What do you mean you picked up a bug? What you've done is you've made your system so toxic, it now needs to go through detoxification. Yeah. That's what you've done. But they're like, oh, I caught it. And people love to pass off responsibility and other things because then it's not down to them. And also the amount of fear porn they pump through the airwaves is something called the nocebo effect, which I've talked about so many times.
Amen.
They will get ill. But
big point on that real quick, actually. The CDC's own data validates that. So the CDC did a study 10 months ago. We're supposed to trust the experts, right? Trust the CDC. In this study, the CDC showed that the two strongest risk factors for death associated with a COVID death, right? And we know that that means nothing, but two strongest risk factors were obesity, no surprise. The second strongest risk factor for COVID death was fear/anxiety related disorders.
And I 100%, but mate, I've seen the research that shows that the placebo and the nocebo are up to 38 to 64% affected, depending on whose research you. Exactly. There was a doctor who didn't believe this. He had it with his son. He's like, this can't be true. I'm going to try it out with my son. In the morning, his son come down to breakfast. He was like, oh, you don't look very well. Are you sure you're all right? His son was like, yeah, I'm absolutely fine. He got his wife in on it as well. So when his wife saw the child, she said, oh, darling, you're okay. You don't feel very well. He's like, I'm fine. Are you sure? They also got the teacher in on this. So when he went to school, the teacher said, you're not looking too good. Are you sure you're okay here? He was like, no, I'm absolutely fine. 2 hours later, the kid broke out into a fever.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. Paul Check was talking about this. I can't remember the doctor it was. And they were like, and he was like, he couldn't believe it. The doctor couldn't believe it. And then once he realized that they were telling nonsense, the body started to heal again. This is like they've done this with chemotherapeutic drugs, Alec. They've told people they're getting chemotherapeutic drugs. They've actually given them the sugar solution and salt solution, and they've believed it so much that their hair fell out, even though they got sugar solution. Yep. That's how much the placebo and nocebo effect is. And you tell people you get this illness or anything. You tell someone they're going to die in 6 months of cancer. What happens? They die in 6 months of cancer,
Yep.
or they die in 6 months of cancer. So anyway, I'll let you go on. But people don't need to understand how powerful the mind is when it comes to this, and that's why they keep on pumping this fear nonsense through the airwaves. So I'll let you take it from here.
All right. So the first thing I like to start with on this is a ping pong ball and brick wall analogy. So if I were to hypothesize that a ping pong ball could break down a brick wall, I think logically speaking, I would need to see that ping pong ball completely by itself breaking down the brick wall, right?
Mhm.
I would need to ensure that there's no confounding variables. I would need to ensure that there's proper controls, all of the things. And if I were to take a giant hammer, smash the brick wall several times, pour a bunch of acid on the brick wall, tape the ping pong ball to a giant boulder, and throw it at the brick wall, and then the brick wall falls down, have I proven or have I validated my hypothesis that the ping pong ball caused the destruction of that brick wall? I would think any logically speaking or any logically thinking person would say no, absolutely not. You did not prove that ping pong ball caused
I
the
will
destruction.
agree with that. I will agree with that premise. Yes.
Yeah. So how does this relate to virology? About to find out. So if I were to tell you that SARS-CoV-2 has never been isolated or proven to exist, what you would likely do is you would go on to Google, you would type in isolation of SARS-CoV-2, you'd find thousands of papers just like this one, isolation characterization of SARS-CoV-2 from the first US COVID-19 patient. You would send me all these studies. You would say, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. How can you possibly say that? Here's thousands of peer-reviewed studies saying the opposite. Who are you? You're just a dude on Twitter who's 29 years old. You're crazy, right? Here's the problem, though. Here's from Webster's dictionary what the term isolate means: to separate from another substance so as to obtain in a pure or free state. Now let's revisit that same exact study, isolation of SARS-CoV-2. This is the same study that was on 2 slides ago, and here's the methods section of that study. And as you see here, highlighted 0E6, minimal essential medium, trypsinized, resuspended, and Delbecco's modified essential medium, penicillin, streptomycin, amphotericin B, observed for cytopathic effect, also 10% fetal bovine serum. So there's a bunch of substances, and in scientific language, it's hard to determine exactly what they're saying, but this is essentially what's happening. So in the methods section of that paper, they have taken a sample of snot. They have put this sample of snot on a monkey kidney cell alongside fetal bovine or fetal calf serum, minimal nutrient medium, and any one or more of the following antibiotics and antimycotics, depending on the paper: amphotericin B, gentamicin, penicillin, streptomycin. They also add trypsin, and then the cell experiences what is called a cytopathic effect after all of these substances have been added to the culture. The culture experiences that cytopathic effect, which essentially is the cell is breaking down into a bunch of fragments. They prepare those fragments for electron microscopy, and an electron micrograph image is produced, and they point to the particles in those electron micrographs and say, these are viruses. So here's the problem with that whole procedure. Before they introduce the sputum, the snot from a sick person who, yes, has symptoms of disease, is experiencing symptoms, they take the snot from that person or other fluids, sometimes blood, sometimes semen, or something else, and they put it on the culture alongside all of those other substances without ever first validating that there is a virus inside that snot, right? They just assume, they presuppose, there is a virus inside these fluids. We're putting this on the culture alongside all of these other things. They also presuppose that the virus produces the effects on the culture, meaning that they assume that none of the other substances, the amphotericin, the gentamicin, trypsin, fetal bovine serum, minimal nutrient medium, which means they're essentially giving the cell the minimal amount of nutrients to keep it viable, right? They assume that none of those other things have the effect on the culture, and they assume that it must be the virus that they assume, but never validate, is inside the fluids of a sick person that they put on the culture. And so every single electron micrograph image, so this image to the right that, so many of us have seen all these images, like, how could you possibly say that, Alec? Like, I've seen so many images just like that of what they're saying is SARS-CoV-2, or really, for the matter, you could insert any other virus there. You could say images of measles virus, you could say images of Ebola, whatever else. Every single electron micrograph image of any virus, but let's just stay with what we're talking about now, SARS-CoV-2, is the result of the experiment that I just described, where they're presupposing that a virus is in the fluids. They add those fluids to the culture alongside all these other substances, assuming that they don't have an effect on the culture whatsoever. Culture breaks down into a bunch of fragments. They say that those fragments are viruses, and that's what these electron micrograph images are. Here's a quote from a virologist, Stefan Lanka. In every single photograph of a virus, you'll find that it's from a cell culture. Never from the blood, never from the saliva, never from the semen, never from another liquid of the body, not from a human, not from an animal, not from a plant. Every single one is the result of the experiment that I've just described. And so it begs the question, why? Why are we isolating viruses this way when we actually have the technology to properly isolate and purify a virus directly from the fluids of a sick person? You would take snot from a sick person, run it through a filter, which would separate particles of known size. And of course, because we've never actually proven that viruses exist in nature, we would have to run this experiment thousands of times over just to, because you have no idea if these particles do exist, what size they actually are. Because again, we're going off of what they've discovered them to be based on the results of the culture, which is simply a byproduct of the cell culture process that I've described earlier. So for the sake of the argument though, viruses, according to virologists, are known to be 50 nanometers to 140 nanometers in size. So you'd simply run them through a filter that separates particles of known size out, where you would have a filtrate that only has particles of known size. You would then put that filtrate inside a density gradient centrifuge, which separates particles by density. So then you would have particles of known size and known density inside a solution. And then you would take that and you would characterize it under a microscope. Probably would want to avoid an electron microscope for reasons that I'll share later. But there's a lot of problems with electron microscopy. But however, you could take that substance and then expose it to a healthy person and see if it replicates symptoms of disease, and then you would have proven that these things exist and that they cause disease in a healthy person. And this has never ever been done. And so this seems pretty logical to me. If you're going to say that this is a disease causing agent and that it exists in the fluids of a sick host, you need to take that substance, do all of this process that we have the technology for, expose it to a healthy person, and see if it causes symptoms of disease. So I've actually approached virologists and I've asked, and you've probably seen me do this on Twitter dozens of times, asked, can you find one single paper in which a virus was isolated, purified, characterized, and sequenced directly from the fluids of a sick host, which they cannot provide. And I've shown that repeatedly. I actually had several virologists, immunologists, molecular biologists block me. And when I pressed them on this, and here's some of the answers that I have received from experts in the realm of virology.
Yep.
1, the virus is too weak to isolate or purify directly from the fluids. Okay, you say that a virus is too weak to isolate or purify directly from the fluids on one hand. That's what virologists say. On the other hand, you say that a virus travels freely through the air, lands on a surface, survives on a surface for upwards of 2 to 3 days, makes it to a body, makes it all the way to a cell, breaks into the cell, hijacks the cell's machinery, and begins a replication process that overwhelms the body and then is expelled out and repeats the same process over and over again. So you say that it's too weak to isolate or purify on one hand, but then it does all these other things on the other hand, and it does that while, just as you mentioned earlier, Ryan, being completely non-living. Mm-hmm. It has no conscious action. So somehow it's doing all of these things and it's strong enough to do all of these things, but it's too weak to isolate or purify directly from the fluids. That doesn't make much sense. The second one is there's not enough virus present in the fluids to isolate or purify it. And actually, this is what Dr. Robert Malone said, and we made a response video to some of his claims.
There's not enough. That was the one that Cowan and Kaufman had on Yeah, I think he said, and they kept on saying, well, what if it was in, what if you took 10
Yep.
people's, what if you took 100 people? Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, to your point, so all three of this response, and this response, and now this response, I have heard from people directly that I've challenged. This one previously, though, I had heard Cowan and Kaufman told me, and I watched, I think, Mike Adams interview them, and they explained that they approached a virologist. It's funny because that must be the thing that they all say. There's not enough virus present inside the fluids to isolate or purify it. And so this is, again, something that Dr. Robert Malone said in the video, and I made a response video with a few of my friends to that video, essentially saying, how can you say on one hand that there's enough virus inside the fluids of a sick person for it to cause disease in a healthy person, right? That it's being expelled out, that this is a disease causing particle. What then is a quote high viral load, right?
Mm,
If there's not enough virus present in the fluids to isolate or purify it, how is it possibly a disease causing agent that is in the fluids? And then to your point on what Cowan and Kaufman have said, they asked the virologist, okay, if you took fluids from 10 people who were sick with the same symptoms and did it, run it through a filter and then through a density gradient centrifuge, would there be enough virus in 10 in the fluids of 10 people? They said nope. Okay, what about 100 people? Nope. 1,000 people? Nope. 10,000 people, and the virologist just stopped talking.
yeah,
So it's just absurd. Then the third one is a virus needs a host in order to replicate, so that's why we use a cell culture. Okay, let's think about this logically again. Why would you need to take a substance that you say contains a bunch of pathogenic disease causing particles, right? Why would you need to take that snot from a sick person and then put it and mix it with a bunch of other substances in order to generate more of it? Why is there not enough present inside that snot of a sick person if that snot of a sick person is enough to cause an entire other person to succumb to symptoms of disease and in many cases supposedly die? How is it possible? If Why do you need to put it on a cell culture if there's enough of it present inside the fluids to
mm,
cause disease in another person supposedly? It doesn't make any sense.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
yeah, it's just, yeah, no sense whatsoever. Go ahead.
none.
Number
And
four.
then so then another piece on the third, and this applies really to number 1 and 2 as well, is how can you possibly assign characteristics to something that you have first never proven to exist? This is akin to saying that. Let me give an example. Here, this is a fun one to give on unicorns. Okay, I live in a ranching community in, let's say, West Texas, and this community is known to have a bunch of ranches with horses on it. And suddenly one night, um, we wake up one morning in our community, in our neighborhood, all of our lawns have been trampled, and we found horse hair, or we found hair in the lawns, we found hoof prints in the lawns. And we look at all of that and we say, oh my goodness, this must mean that there is a nocturnal flying unicorn that lands at night, or an entire herd of them that lands at night and tramples all of our lawns. That's essentially what they're saying here with virology. They have never first proven that this flying unicorn exists, and they're just assuming that all of these effects that are happening are the result of the flying unicorns without ever validating that there's a flying unicorn, and while also completely ignoring that they live in a freaking ranching community and
Yeah,
that there are horses nearby, and it may just be that someone lets out the horses at night to trample the lawns. It's the same thing. We have poisons all around us at all times. We're assuming that it is this thing that we have never proven to exist, and completely ignore all the other many things that are making us sick, which I'll get into later.
yeah, yeah.
So then number 4, this is my favorite response I've gotten. This is the most frequent one. You're not a virologist. You don't get to determine what isolation is, or you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. Where's your lab time? This, and that, which that's an appeal to authority or an
Mhm.
ad hominem mixed into one. And that's what I find more often than not, is that they argue with logical fallacies when they cannot
Yeah.
actually.
I've had that, mate. No, it's not what you specialize in. It's like, well, I specialize in health. I don't special. I'm not an oncologist, but I've helped people overcome cancer. I'm not a rheumatologist, but I've helped people overcome, arthritis and you name it. So I don't care what your title is. It's like I've got eyes, I've got a brain, I can read stuff, I can look.
Exactly.
And that's unfortunately what people, as you said, people like to appeal to authority. But yeah, you're not a virologist. You don't get to determine what isolation is. Well, actually, I'm not determining what isolation is. The dictionary is determining what isolation is.
Yep.
And we're just trying to keep by those standards, because otherwise you keep on changing what the fucking standards are, then we don't know what's going on. You can't keep moving the goalposts. What is isolation?
Yep. And yeah, and I'll get into that in a little bit too, on that. Like, not only are they not meeting the commonly known definition of isolation, they're literally not adhering to the scientific method. And I can share that. And I've actually shifted my asking of virologists. I asked them to provide me one single virology paper that strictly adheres to the scientific method with proper controls and a properly assigned independent variable before proceeding with experimentation. And they literally cannot do it. And I'll get into that in a little bit. It's pretty crazy. Like, they always call people like you and me, and probably a lot of people listening or watching this, pseudoscientific, when quite literally their methods are pseudoscientific. I'll just share it now. So this is a fun one for me. Okay, pseudoscience, one of the definitions of it is anything that claims to be scientific but does not strictly adhere to the scientific method, right? That is the definition of pseudoscience. Okay, so when it comes to virology, they have not properly identified an independent variable, alleviating any concern for confounding variables before proceeding with experimentation. Let me expand on that. So in this case, the independent variable, the thing you think based on your hypothesis has the effect or produces the effect, the dependent variable, is virus, right? That is the independent variable. When have they identified, or where did they identify the independent variable, alleviating concern for other confounding variables before proceeding with experimentation? They didn't. They, again, just as I referred to earlier, they assume that there is a virus present inside the fluids of a sick person, right? And even inside those fluids, even if you do run it through a filter, which they often do, there are going to be many confounding variables. There's going to be food particles, red blood cells, white blood cells, proteins, other toxins. There's going to be many other things inside the fluids of a sick person, right? They put that on a culture alongside many other substances: fetal bovine serum, Tobacco's modified eagle medium, minimal nutrient medium, trypsin, amphotericin D, gentamicin, all these other substances. They're putting this thing, or this substance, this fluid that they presuppose contains a virus, on the culture alongside those things. And then boop, it produces their so-called independent variable, or it produces an effect, really, the cytopathic effect. And then they assume that it was caused by the independent variable, which they never first validated. So that is pseudoscientific, literally, because it's not following the scientific method. And then further, they don't conduct proper control experiments either. So their methods are literally pseudoscientific.
It's all of everything they do is pseudoscientific, apart from when it comes to it. It's like you get, it's hilarious. If I eat a peanut and I get an allergic reaction to it, people know that, oh, that peanut caused that reaction. But when it comes to vaccines, you inject someone with it, they die, or they get palsy or whatever. It wasn't the vaccination, the wind changed direction. And so they just like the goalpost whenever it suits them. It's just craziness. It's pseudoscience at its highest. It's the last remaining. It's a cult. It's a cult. And so, and they predict. I think it was John Enders. I think you might even get.
Well, isn't that what they've inverted the meaning of literally everything?
Yeah. I mean, was John Enders in 1954? He was the one who's come up with this, and he's like, if we don't carry on this myth, we're all going to have to become plumbers or something, because this is complete nonsense.
Yeah.
And so most people don't even know.
I actually get into John Enders' paper in this.
Yeah, let's go for it. Sorry, mate. It's just because there's certain things you can just tail off on, because you don't get to determine what isolation is. Well, you get to determine everything, do you? And then you just get to determine the answers as well. And even when things don't make sense, I'll just go along with it because you're the authority. It's like, Not for me.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the problem with I would have said previously Western culture, but it's not just Western culture, it's the entire world, is that we've been indoctrinated through the public school system, through our upbringing, through schooling, through, you know, even higher education and university, to just outsource to experts when we can't understand something. Like, oh, I can't understand this. This doesn't make any fucking sense to me. I just must not understand it well, and the experts just must know.
Mhm.
And the reality is, more often than not, when it doesn't make sense, when you have tried to deliberate in your head and break down the process by which they're doing things, when it doesn't make sense, it's because it doesn't fucking make
Yeah,
sense.
100%. 100%.
It's not because expert knows better than you. It's because okay. So some of the other substances added to the culture, fetal bovine serum. This is important when it applies to the so-called genomic sequencing of the virus, because this is a paper published in Nature in 2016, and essentially what this paper talks about is that fetal bovine serum is a rich source of RNA that interferes with any downstream RNA analysis. So the way they do the so-called genomic sequencing for this virus, because there is fetal bovine serum included in the culture, they can't possibly know whether the fetal bovine serum is being in those RNA fragments that they're then stranding together in this alignment process to say that there is a new so-called virus and here's the new so-called viral genome. So that's the first thing. Then all these other substances that are added to the culture.
Oh,
Trypsin. So trypsin's added to the culture. Trypsin, go ahead.
no, I was just going
What
to
are you
say
saying?
this is. No, I was just going to say this is just like it just shows. Like, I mean, I sort of know where you're going with this, but yeah, for people out there, this is crazy. Trypsin breaks down proteins, continuing the process of digestion that began in the stomach. You're like, what do you think that's going to do to
Yeah, especially like, okay, if they're saying that a virus, this is what they say, that it's a strand of RNA or DNA wrapped in a protein coating. So wouldn't you think that trypsin, if we're assuming that these particles exist, would trypsin, which breaks down proteins, not have an effect on the morphological structure of these particles? I would think so. And they're assuming, again, that this has no effect on the process whatsoever. Another one, amphotericin B, and this is a big one. Amphotericin B and gentamicin are used in virtually every one or two of these are used in virtually every so-called isolation paper. And amphotericin B, and this is something that I found on Google. It's a quick Google search: side effects of amphotericin B. Tubular damage is a well-known problem associated with amphotericin B, but acute renal failure is the most serious complication, and this is why this matters. Remember, in this cell culture isolation process, what type of cell culture are they using? They're using a monkey kidney cell. Amphotericin B is put on alongside all these other substances. Amphotericin B failure that they're on a monkey kidney cell. Another one, gentamicin. One of the most common side effects of gentamicin is kidney damage. Again, they're putting gentamicin on a monkey kidney cell and assuming it has no effect whatsoever. So this is
Alec, I'm just getting some. Alec, man. Ugh. Ah, bloody hell. Ow, mate. Sorry, that just went completely. Is your connection all right? Mhm. No, 1 second. Al, can you hear me?
Good now?
Yeah, it's good now. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm good now. I've just got you. Just as you went back onto that thing. I mean, yeah, it's all right. It's all right now. For some reason, it was just on that last
I can
slide.
pick where I left off.
Yeah, go for it.
That one?
It was
What was
the
the last thing? I'll just restart this whole slide so you can edit it. You can edit it and just go straight from here.
this one. This one.
Yep.
Uh,
And I'll restart this whole slide to make it easier for you to edit.
Perfect. Go for it.
Cool. So other substances that are added to the culture, trypsin. So trypsin breaks down proteins, continuing the process of digestion. Remember that what they say, what they're again assuming, this is all based on assumption that a virus is a strand of RNA or DNA wrapped in a protein coating, right? So if trypsin is added to the culture, and if we're assuming that these particles exist, which again, to be clear, they have never been proven to exist, but if we're assuming that they do, wouldn't trypsin have an effect on these particles, on these viral particles, given that they are wrapped in a protein coating? Something to consider, right? And that's added to the culture alongside amphotericin B or gentamicin. Amphotericin B, and this is both of amphotericin B and gentamicin, these are really, really key to, to discuss here, because remember, what we're talking about is their use in a cell culture, which means that they're being placed on a monkey kidney cell, a vero cell culture, a kidney cell. Amphotericin B and gentamicin, two common side effects with them, amphotericin B is acute renal failure, is one of the most serious complications. And for gentamicin, kidney damage. So these are easy to find on Google. You just type in side effects of amphotericin B or gentamicin, and it discusses kidney damage and acute renal failure. Wouldn't you think that if these substances are being placed on a monkey kidney cell alongside all of these substances, that they're likely going to have a detrimental effect to that monkey kidney cell, given that they cause acute renal failure and kidney damage in human beings? Probably, right?
Yeah, probably. It's just crazy that no one with these scientists that are meant to be super smart, they're so smart that they can't even see this. This is crazy.
No, it's crazy. And so this is where I like to talk about the limitations of electron microscopy. Again, remember, every electron micrograph image that you've ever seen of SARS-CoV-2 or any virus for that matter comes as a result of this process, right? And these are more electron micrograph images of the cytopathic effect, which again, the cytopathic effect is when the cell breaks down into a bunch of fragments, right? These are said to be electron micrograph images of SARS-CoV-2, this as well. And here's the issue with electron microscopy. And this is from a biologist by the name of, when a tissue is prepared for electron microscopy, an animal is killed, the tissue is excised, it is fixed or frozen, it is embedded, it is sectioned, it is rehydrated, it is stained, it is mounted, it is radiated by light or bombarded by electron beams. Do you think if I were to take you, Ryan, in your natural state and do all of those things to you, that you would look like yourself?
What?
I would think not.
Fixed, frozen, embedded, sectioned, rehydrated, stained, mounted, radiated, bombarded by electron beams. I mean, it might have some sort of effect. It's just crazy.
Right, exactly. So that's the issue, is we don't even know that these electron micrograph images are producing anything that resembles what these alleged substances look like in their natural state. And that's without even bringing in the context of that we're adding all of these things, all of these substances to this culture, right? And then assuming that the virus caused that, assuming that the particles that result afterwards are viruses, then we prepare them for electron microscopy, again, via all these processes. And then we say, these particles in these images, those are viruses. It's absurd. It's like, just like you said, the highest level of pseudoscience. And here's the issue as well. So there's a slight problem with even calling any of these particles viruses, and here's why. This is an article, a peer-reviewed study that was published in Kidney 360. It's titled "Appearances Can Be Deceiving: Viral-like Inclusions in COVID-19 Negative Renal Biopsies by Electron Microscopy." So in negative renal biopsies, both pre-COVID era negative renal biopsies, and then also COVID era negative renal biopsies in people who were negative for SARS-CoV-2 or for COVID via probably a PCR test, which is pseudoscientific in and of itself. But the point is, these images had morphologically indistinguishable particles from what virologists refer to as SARS-CoV-2, and they were in people who were negative for COVID and also in people pre-COVID era. And they're indistinguishable from the particles that virologists say are SARS-CoV-2. And also another important point to note here is that these were negative renal biopsies. So again, they were kidney biopsies. Again, going back to the monkey kidney cell that is being used in this process. So maybe there's something to do with kidneys here that they just produce the same. They can produce the same effect over and over and over again. So you brought this up, and this is an important point. So the history of this method, because people typically ask, like, how the fuck did they come up with this nonsense to begin with? And this is how they came up with it.
So basically, we're going to put loads of poison. Basically, we're going to starve the cell, or at least feed it minimal nutrients. We're going to put loads of antibiotics on it, which is like negative life, antibiotic, negative life. We're going to put all these other chemicals on it, just destroy it. And then we're going to blame it on the virus. Right. Yeah. Cool. I think I'm getting what you're saying, mate. But yeah, carry on.
Exactly. So history of cell culture isolation methods. So this is from John Franklin Enders. This is the materials and methods section from his paper where he, quote, discovered the measles virus, right? And in red, you'll see a bunch of substances, and I've listed them here on the next slide. Milk, streptomycin, penicillin, bovine amniotic fluid, beef embryo extract, horse serum, antibiotics, formaldehyde, hematoxylin, eosin, soybean, trypsin, phenol red, all placed on a monkey kidney cell alongside throat, blood, and poop samples, which again were from people who had the presentation of symptoms, who had symptoms of measles, right? Which is different than what we're trying to figure out here. What he was trying to figure out, what is the cause of these symptoms? Mm-hmm. He was under the assumption or had the hypothesis that it was caused by these particles. And somehow he thought it was the correct scientific approach to take these throat, blood, and poop samples and somewhere in the process combine them with all of these other substances that are listed here. Again, milk, streptomycin, penicillin, bovine amniotic fluid, all this junk, right?
It's just like, I mean, yeah, like everything he's put, how did he even come up with this concoction? Formaldehyde, but used to balm people, yeah? Antibiotics, penicillin, horse serum, it's just soybean. Yeah, it's just insanity.
And so what happened is, of course, the monkey kidney cell broke down into a bunch of fragments, experiencing the cytopathic effect. He prepared it for electron microscopy, produced electron micrograph images, and said, these are measles viruses. These are the things that must be causing people to be sick. Here's the issue, though, and somehow this was completely glossed over, and this method with variations has been adopted for all of modern virology. This is a quote from Ender's paper. The cytopathic changes it induced in the unsustained preparations could not be distinguished with confidence from the viruses isolated from measles. So what he's saying there is he conducted a control experiment where no throat, blood, or poop samples, so no possible source of measles was present, but he went through the exact same process with the milk, streptomycin, all the other things, and the exact same effect occurred. The exact same thing.
So this is what Stefan Lanka did again, right?
Yep. Stefan Lanka has done the same thing. And it's just so crazy to me that this was in Ender's paper. Somehow it was completely missed by the entire scientific community, and this was adopted as the way to isolate viruses.
Missed, or this is what I was going to say to you earlier before I actually I forgot because we're going to some. This is awesome, mate. But it's like Rupert Sheldrake's got a book out there called The Science Delusion. And we were telling before about how people, you probably know about it, and people say, well, this comes, I can't quite work it out. Maybe I must not be clever enough. He's like, no. There's some things that he says. I think there's 10 things he goes through in the book, but it's like, even though the science can't explain it, and they just say, well, that's just the way it is. It's like, well, is it? Is it just the way it is, or is it a load of bullshit? And so this, just for people to understand that Enders here has got a cell that has no virus in it, quote unquote, and he's got a cell that has the virus in it, quote unquote, and he's done the same things to both of them. And what happened to both of the cells was indistinguishable. So they both broke down, and because that's what happens when you put poison and starve things.
Imagine putting all of these substances in on a cell that is already isolated from the rest of a complex physical, emotional, spiritual, chemical, energetic, electrical, biological being, and doing all these things to it and thinking that it's not having any effect. And it must be the virus that I've never even proven to exist inside the throat, blood, or poop samples that is causing all these things to happen. It's absurd.
Well,
Absurd.
yeah.
And so back to the ping pong ball brick wall analogy. I'm sure most people can understand now what I'm referring to here, but even this analogy is probably not the best one, because in the ping pong ball brick wall analogy,
Ping pong
we
ball's
know
actually there.
yeah, the ping pong ball is actually there. We know it's there, right? With a virus, we're just assuming that it's there. It'd be like we are assuming that the ping pong ball is present, and we do all these things, and then the result is the brick wall breaking down. We say, there must have been a ping pong ball attached to this, and that must be what caused all this to happen. It's nonsense. It's all nonsense.
Mm.
So obviously riddled with fallacious reasoning. I don't need to go over that again. Okay, but then now you get into Stefan Lanka's control experiment. So Stefan Lanka essentially did exactly what John Franklin Enders did in the 1950s with the control experiment, except he did it in the modern era with COVID. So in each of these vertical columns is different substances added to the culture, right? Gosh dang, I don't know what keeps doing that. Sorry. And along the rows, it's electron micrograph images on day 1, and then also electron micrograph images on day 5. So in the first one, cell culture with no substances added to it except for one antibiotic, and no cytopathic effects were observed. So nothing happened to the culture. The cells maintained their integrity. Nothing happened. And the second vertical column, cell culture with 10% fetal bovine serum and one antibiotic. Again, no cytopathic effect occurred. In column 3, cell culture with minimal nutrient medium, 1% fetal bovine serum, and 3 antibiotics, that's the process that is done in virtually every single virus isolation paper. And as you can see, cytopathic effect did occur, meaning that the cells broke down into a bunch of fragments. And so you would say, oh, these must be viruses. Here's the issue, though. There was no fluids from a sick person added to the culture whatsoever. It was only minimal nutrient medium, 1% fetal calf serum, 3 antibiotics. Again, the exact same process that they use for nearly every viral isolation paper. No fluids from a sick person present, and the cell still experienced the cytopathic effect, breaking down to a bunch of fragments that virologists typically say are viruses. And so in vertical column 4, a cell culture, all the same substances that were added in the previous one that experienced the cytopathic effect. Again, the 1% fetal calf serum, minimal nutrient medium, 3 antibiotics, but also in this case, yeast RNA was added. And the reason for yeast RNA being added was to take the place of any possible, quote, virus RNA that could be present from the fluids of a sick person. And the reason that this was added was to show that the genomic sequencing process for viruses is completely pseudoscientific and baseless as well. Because what Stefan Lanka showed is that just by adding yeast RNA to the culture and then presenting the results through the PCR process, I think running it between 35 and 40 cycles, he was able to reconstruct 98% of the SARS-CoV-2 genome without any so-called virus present whatsoever. And again, that applies to all the quote variants, because the way that they discovered or found the first genome of SARS-CoV-2 was this. They took 49 patients who they deemed to be sick with a new so-called disease. They took one sample from each of those patients, did not filter it, did not centrifuge it, just took this sample of snot that contains so many substances, again, RNA, DNA, bacteria, fungi, toxins, proteins, red blood cells, white blood cells, food particles, so many things inside a sample of snot. They extracted every single fragment of RNA they could from that snot. They threw out any long strand of RNA, any RNA strand that was over 150 base pairs, they threw it out. So, and again, the context there is that longer strand of RNA would represent a more complete organism. They threw all those out. They ended up with 56.5 million fragments of RNA. They put it into this alignment process, this genomic sequencing alignment process that essentially strands these fragments of RNA together templated against SARS-CoV-1, which they, quote, isolated via the same methods. They generated 1 million possible new, quote, sequences of a new virus, templating it together, right, by extracting all these fragments of RNA. And they found it to be 80% similar to SARS-CoV-1. And out of those 1 million possibilities, they arbitrarily voted on the longest one and said, this is a new genome of a new virus. We're referring to it as SARS-CoV-2. So how did they find the variants? They repeated the same process, except that it was templated against this SARS-CoV-2 genome this time. So they would do the same process, get a sample of snot, or take the results of the cell culture, again, referring back to fetal bovine serum being added to the culture, take the results of the cell culture, strand it together inside this computer program, find that it's 98, 99% similar, and say, this is a variant of SARS-CoV-2. We're calling this the Lambda variant. We're calling this the Delta variant, the Mu variant, whatever variant. That's how they come up with this. And what Stefan Lanka has showed, that without any sample of snot present whatsoever, just by adding yeast RNA to the culture, you can do the exact same process and get essentially the same exact thing, showing that this genomic sequencing process is completely nonsense.
I mean, it's so, I mean, we've known for long how corrupt it is, but it's just like, it's mind-boggling just how it's just, it's just like they're coming up with this absolute nonsense to perpetuate nonsense. So they almost have to make these things do what they do just so they have like a theory to show the public, because most public won't understand what they're even looking at. And so they're like, well, we do all this stuff to it. We're scientists, right? And where's the science? Like,
yeah, where is the actual science? You keep saying that like you're a scientist. What are you doing actual science? And I would argue not. And then just one last piece to this, and I still have 45 minutes, so I don't know how long you want to go on this, but just one minor piece, and this is important, is people say, okay, yeah, I can see that there's fraud occurring here and that viruses have never been proven to exist, but I can't deny that 2 or more people get sick in the same space and that there has to be some form of contagion. And that's where I like to share this. So when it comes to contagion, this is one of several experiments that have been conducted disproving that disease is transmitted via fluids of a sick person. So what was done here, this was during the Spanish flu from 1918 through 1919, and 100 volunteers from the Navy were chosen who had no history of influenza. They were exposed via various methods to people who were sick or to fluids from people who were sick, like injected with blood from influenza patients, swabbed with or inoculated with mixtures from mucus secretions taken from the mouth, nose, and throat of influenza patients, exposed to patients in an influenza ward, had them shake hands with the patients, open mouth cough into their face, breathe directly into their face. And the results were none of the volunteers in these experiments developed influenza. And this was during the Spanish flu, which is said to be the most contagious, deadly
Spanish flu
disease ever. Exactly.
Wasn't Spanish, wasn't flu. Same as polio, which wasn't
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I don't need to belabor this point, but that wasn't the only example. Another set of experiments in 1919, 0 out of 50 men became sick. Another experiment in 1919 again, 0 out of 6 men became sick. Another one, a higher percentage of people got sick after being exposed to saline compared to those being exposed to the so-called virus in 1920. Another one in 1921, 0 out of 45 people became ill. Another one in 1924, 0 out of 100, 0 out of 200 in 1937. I could go on and on and on. Contagion has never, ever, ever been proven to be real. Disease has never been proven to be transmitted via the fluids of a sick person.
No, and I would say that's undeniably true. And this is the thing, is there is something called signal transduction where people have an aura, energetic field around them, like everything does. And research has shown, like, if you're a sick person is around a healthy person, the sick person will actually extract energy from that healthy person, the same way that women's periods sync up, which is something that I've told. And is that contagious? Is that viral? It's like, no.
Or like if I yawn and you yawn near me, is that caused by a pathogenic virus?
100%. And I say this to people all the time, like, and if your body, say you're going through the detoxification process, and you're I've had it before when obviously I was going through, and I even had like bits of my skin coming off because my body was getting rid of so many deep lying toxins, you know. And people go through it. Your body can withstand temperatures and heat that certain parasites and bacteria can't. So that's where you get a fever. It's where you don't want to take things to stop the fever because your body's getting rid of it. It's almost like nature knows what it's doing. And so when you get these things, I say to people, if you're going through a detoxification effect and your husband or wife or whoever's living with you is near you and they need to go through one as well, your bodies will speak to each other and your body might say, okay, you know what, we could do with that as well, and it'll go through it. Other people who are super healthy won't. That's why you can have an office of 30 people and only 10 people come down with the virus, quote unquote, and the other 20 don't, because their body's spoken going, well, we don't need to go through a cleaning because we're healthy enough. And that's something that people really need to understand. And just because they call that pseudoscience, it's like, no, everything has this energetic field. You know, we're all just, I mean, you can see it on the morphic field of people. And so people, something they need to understand. How do they explain women's periods? Thinking like that. Just look at that. This is the most basic one that women know that. They go and live with another woman for that length of time. The rest of the women's periods will sync up with the strongest woman, or the woman who has the strongest auric field or strongest energy, and that's what happens in nature. But it's not through. I said before, it's not through, as you clearly demonstrated, it's not through a virus or contagion.
And you know, to your point there, and you bring up such a good point. That's exactly what I think is happening when people who are unvaccinated are around people who have been vaccinated recently. And it's exactly in line with what you're saying. I think what's happening there is not something being shed from the vaccinated person. I think it's that when unvaccinated people are around them, the vaccinated person's body is signaling to the unvaccinated, like, hey, I've come into contact with this poison, oftentimes willingly, but I've come into contact with this new poison. Your body needs to detoxify right now so that it is better prepared when it comes in contact, even though many of us won't. I'm never going to receive that thing, right? But if your body comes into contact with this poison, you need to detoxify right now so that you're better prepared. So what happens? People who are unvaccinated that have been around the vaccinated people experience these crazy detox reactions where women are a period cycle for a woman is a detoxification
100%.
mechanism. That is what's happening in a lot of women, is they start bleeding, and it's their blood, I think, their blood detoxifying.
Yeah, that's 100%. Like we generally have 5, well, men have 4 ways of main detoxification effects: breath, sweat, urine, and stool. Women have 5. That's why they live longer in general, because they get to bloodlet once a month for a long period of time. And so, yeah, the body's saying, I don't want that in, I need to get rid of it. And if your blood's got lots of toxins in it, wants to get rid of it. That's what it does. And that makes, you know what, that's the first time that's actually come in, but that makes perfect sense. So that actually makes sense. You know, when you say that, you're like, oh, that makes sense, because, for example, when people have too much iron in their blood, you know, they have to give blood, or you know, the body will go through a detoxification where it will sweat, or, you know, healing crisis. For example, when I get a client and we go through certain things, their body may go through a healing crisis where they get a little bit worse before they get better. It's called a Hexmeter reaction, first discovered when they were curing people of syphilis. Or
I mean, the symptoms are real.
The symptoms are real. Yeah. So, and that can be anything from, you know, skin irritations, bad breath, discharge, vaginal discharge, diarrhea, blood. I mean, it can be anything. And so the body's getting rid of these things, and so that makes sense. Oh my God, I've been around. Yeah, because your body's had a signal saying you need to prepare in case you do get hit with this, because stuff is so toxic. I mean, you've seen some of the blood clots coming out of people have been pulled out. God. It's horrific. And I've never seen anything like it. And so, yeah, that does make sense. That's something that, you know, I'll definitely take forward into this, because people, and this is the other thing, you know, people have been getting these injections to try and stop getting ill from something that didn't even exist, all because they wanted to go on holiday, or because, you know, they were so scared. And yeah, if you're not one of us, Alec, and you are just in the mainstream and you're listening to the news all day, you're going to be fucking scared. You're going to be like, it's only when when you know it's laughable what they're doing, you're just like, oh, this is ridiculous. But when you're not, and you're actually bought into it, I mean, you only have to look at it for half an hour, the news, and the way that it comes on, and the images. It's like it's all set up to make you scared. I don't know if you've ever seen that little it's like a little video, caricature sort of video, where it describes like how they get attention. It says this, it's just like basically this little character comes out and he says, "Listen up, everyone. I've got the news for you." And everyone goes, "Ooh, have you seen this one?
No.
Have you seen it?"
It's
And
amazing.
the guy goes, so basically, most of the things going on in the world is good. There's a few things that are bad, but generally you're going to be all right. Everyone's like, "Oh, great, great." And day two, "Listen up, everyone. Basically, it's the same news." Everyone's like, "Oh, okay." Day three, everyone, everyone's still pretty good. There's a few bad things, but mainly people are good in the world. Like, oh, all right, no one's listening. By day five, everyone's switched off. Day six, another news channel opens up. "Everyone listen, horrific things are going on in the world. You better be prepared." And it was like, "Oh," and it's like, and it's like, and the guy's like, "Well, all you're doing is telling them a load of nonsense." It's like, shh, shh, shh. I'm getting attention over here. And
Yeah.
that's basically, I say to people all the time, like, most people are good people, otherwise you wouldn't be able to walk down the street without getting mugged. But when you're just being brainwashed by this stuff so much, it gets, and there's division, black, white, rich, poor, left, right, all this nonsense, vaccinated, unvaccinated, meatless, meat eaters, it's all this division. Now we're going to be what is it, like green energy versus climate
Yeah.
change
There's just
deniers.
so many. It's so
And
many, man.
this is the thing, it's so many. And so, I mean, what you've done there, though, that those slides, you said you got another 20 to go in. I'd be interested to
Yeah,
know.
well, I'm done for now. I there's a few that I could bring up, just like what causes us to be sick, and I mean, I can
Oh,
just
yeah,
list off all of the things that are causing us to be sick that you and I and all of our listeners know. I mean,
yeah.
that's the question that people always ask. Okay, but what's making me sick if not a virus? I'm like, my God, there's how long do you have? That
Yeah,
could be
yeah.
like 20 podcast episodes in and of itself. So
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I mean, this is the other thing about this sort of stuff as well. "Oh, that could make me sick." Really? It's like, have you ever? This is why I always say to them, like, because sometimes people, they're so, they believe that their government, etc., is out to help them, and so they're like, "Well, if it was that bad, they wouldn't be able to sell it." I'm like, really? What about cigarettes? Yeah, or what about alcohol? Or all the other things. Look at your chocolate. Well, what's in it? Exactly. You tell me what's in it. 89 ingredients in your chocolate bar. Yeah.
yep,
Not just cacao and milk or whatever. And then it's like, okay, go beyond that. Go and watch a film called like Erin Brockovich, which basically just shows you what they're doing. Or Dark Water,
yes,
about how the Teflon in 1970s, I think it took them 40 years to even pay people out. That they were putting runoff into farms. They were getting all the cows that are dying of cancer, people around the area dying of cancer. This is just like a couple of them. Vaccine companies, do your research. The top four, I've said this millions of times, I'll say it again, the top four vaccine companies the last 10 years have paid out over 35 billion in damages for falsifying science, bribing government officials, killing people, etc. You're going to trust them? And so this is when people say, "What's making me ill?" Well, yeah, all the poisons, the volatile organic compounds, the fragrances that have been sprayed all over you, your food, which is not even food anymore, your water, which has got all sorts of chemicals and parasites in it, your Teflon pans you're using, the soaps and shampoos you're putting on your hair. I mean, the plastics you're around all day long, the fact you're being bombarded with EMFs. I mean, the list is endless.
yep. It really is, and a big piece of that too is the perpetual state of fear and anxiety or fight or flight response that many people are in. Just like you said, the nocebo effect, even just the belief that I'm going to be sick, or even if you're not believing that you're going to be sick, but you're constantly stressed out, you're
Yeah,
constantly in fight or flight, that is going to produce symptoms of disease
yeah.
without question.
And research shows nowadays that most 75% of people are in, no, sorry, people are in fight or flight 75% of the time, which is obviously the body's never going to heal, rest, or recover. And the body summates stress is what people need to understand. The body summates stress. So it doesn't matter if it's coming from your finances, your relationship, your work, whatever it is. You could be eating the best food in the world, and meditating, doing everything. But if you're going to work and you hate your job, that's a very toxic place to be. And not
man.
just mention the virus, they put out fear about the food supply and about the economy and about all these things. So people run walking around going, "Oh my God, how am I going to survive?" And that's exactly where they want you to be, because when you're in survival, you're not in your human brain. You're just thinking about survival, or you're just literally, you can be easily manipulated because all you want to do is survive, and that's where they want you. And one of
Amen.
the things I actually wanted to ask you, actually, Alec, was you said you've given up, you quit your job or your job in the military. For people out there, I always like to say, because all this is going on, and one of my superpowers is knowing all this stuff and not letting it affect me. I know it all. I like to be informed so I can make, yeah, do what's necessary. I go on living my life. But some people, that it's very hard for them. So I always say, if it's too hard, you know, just concentrate on, put your energy into all the positive things, because that's going to. And one of the things, it's 2022. People say, "Oh, I need a job." It's 2022. There's all many ways to earn an income
Yes.
online. And for yourself, had a government wage. What did you do in terms of how did
Yeah, so
you?
I mean, I got out of the army, and I will say it took me 6 months to build Health Freedom for Humanity to the point that it was actually receiving enough recurring donations, because we're a nonprofit, that we're receiving enough recurring donations to where I could take a salary. So I I started Health Freedom for Humanity while I was still in the army. I got out of the army, and for 6 months, I was not receiving any income, but I was so set on making this organization profitable and helping the world with this organization that I now earn a salary as the director of Health Freedom for Humanity as of November. So
Awesome.
that's how I'm making money.
And so for people out there, what is Health Freedom for Humanity, and how do they
Yeah.
get involved?
Yeah. So Health Freedom for Humanity is a nonprofit whose mission is to educate, empower, and unite people for all walks of life under one common purpose: the reclamation and defense of health freedom. So we're really focused on education, empowerment, and uniting people. And we define health freedom in two ways. One is obviously the right to choose what is best for your own health without coercion or force. But the second one, which we hold to be equally important, maybe if not even more important, the right to know and access what produces and maintains mind, body, spirit wellness. Because if you're so focused on like your choice to be able to not choose vaccines, not choose masking, which is fundamentally your right, regardless of what anyone else says, and we educate people on that. We educate people on common law principles and some natural law principles, and help them understand that it is their consent. That's the reason that they're subject to all this nonsense. But more importantly, if you're just focused on, oh, I don't want the vaccine, but you're still eating like shit, you're still drinking like shit, you're still subjecting yourselves to other things that are not maintaining or producing health, then you're missing the point entirely. Health freedom also includes what it takes to be free and healthy. So we're educating and empowering people on that. And so on the uniting piece, we have 19 chapters in the United States, and we're growing as fast as we can. We only have 3 people that work for our organization full time, so it's a process. But we also have chapters in 3 other countries: one in the UK, one in Canada, and then one in Australia. So we're growing as fast as we can.
And who is the guy who's in the UK?
I'll send you afterwards. I don't know if she'd want me to share, but I'll send it to you afterwards.
Okay, okay.
But
It's
if you
interesting.
go to my website, if you go to our website, healthfreedomforhumanity.org, and then click chapters,
Yeah,
it'll show you the list of chapters, and you can click UK, and it'll give you the contact info for our
cool. And
UK
so
chapter.
and so with it, so it's basically, is it so it's educating people for free? Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's educating people for free as of now. And what we're developing right now that will launch in August is a Health Freedom for Humanity membership platform. And all that it requires to be a member is a recurring donation, either a monthly donation or an annual donation to be a member. And there's a lot of really cool stuff that we're working on to help provide solutions in real time for people who are trying to disconnect from the system.
Awesome, man. I mean, I'd be interested in getting involved with you, really, if that was
I
an
would
option.
love that, dude. I would love it.
Yeah, because I put so much content out all the time for free anyway, so it doesn't really make much difference. But it'd be great. I'm gonna be, well, because a bit. My girlfriend's now she lives in California, so I'm going to be back and forth to the States anyway. So maybe even hit you up. Whereabouts are you? You in Texas?
I'm moving to Texas in 2 weeks, so I'll be in just north of Austin, Texas.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
And whereabouts are you now? Kansas.
Kansas City. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I haven't been to Kansas, but I want to check out Texas this year actually because yeah, loads of people I know have moved there. But the thing is, my girlfriend was in California, and I was always like, oh, you know, California. I used to love California; it's one of my favorite places.
I know.
And I was, and I was like, I don't really like want to go there because of what's going on. And she's like, well, you know what? She's like, I live in Huntington Beach. It's the OC. The OC is super conservative. They're like, don't LA my OC. She said it didn't even shut down throughout any of it.
Oh,
And so that's, and I was like, okay. And we went there, and I was like, I could, yeah, I'm fine with this. And another thing you're going to say here, what we're going to say before, Tom Barnett talks about this. When you like walk around with an energy of, I don't really care what they say. I've not even been like, it doesn't bother me wherever they do anything. I work online. I'm not going to be taxed by them. I don't really care. Like, so wherever I am, I'm like, okay, I just, do you know what I mean? It just doesn't even bother me.
exactly. And that's the thing that so many people in the like health freedom movement don't get, that is really frustrating to me, is that freedom, you don't need to go petition outside or like, you know, protest outside the government building or ask them for your freedom back. I don't like that you have control over me. I don't want it anymore. They have control over you because you acknowledged that they have control over you.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you say you don't have any freaking control over me, I don't even acknowledge your authority, I'm going to live my life and be the authority over my own life, and I don't care what you do. This would end like that if everyone adopted that same approach.
100%. This is something I did a short little video on this morning because someone put on Twitter, yeah, oh, PCR tests, lockdowns, and social distancing are coming back. And I was like, it never was here for me. Like,
Exactly.
for 2 years, I was going around, I was on planes, I was going here, then everywhere. People were like, you can't fly because of, I was like, well, I've just flown to Greece and back twice, and Ibiza, and I flew to America. No, not America, I flew to Mexico and back 3 times. What do you mean you can't fly? Oh, it's hassle. Well, you know, it's just like it doesn't apply. It's like I just do what I need to do and just go across. And humans, I always say to people, because I want to leave them with like a message of like hope. I say, first of all, humans have always found a way. No matter what happens, they've always found a way. Second of all, when I did this 2 years ago, I was one of about 5 nutcases on the planet who knew this was all nonsense, and people thought I was crazy. Now, most people realize this is all nonsense, especially this new thing that they're trying to bring out. Everyone's like, I'm not believing this crap. And so now there's strength in numbers. So no matter what they do, I said it only like this whole global pandemic treaty that they brought out, where you know, oh, they've taken away everyone's government's rights and the WHO has say what they do, but only in the case of a pandemic. But the WHO get to tell you when it's pandemic and for how long. So yeah, well, I've never listened to them to begin with, so it doesn't really matter what they say. Oh, it's pandemic. I'm like, cool, not for me. So
Exactly.
and that's what I was going to try to say to people. Like, yeah, you just in California. I was like, well, there's so much to do here. Like, what are they going to stop me from going in the woods? Good luck. Or like,
Exactly.
and I like the fact about the OC as well. They were like super conservative. They're out on the beach in Huntington. I was like,
Yep.
that's where I'd be. Like, apparently everyone was on the beach, and I was like, okay, well, I can deal with that.
Yep.
LA, if everyone's complying, I must be like, well, I wouldn't be there. So
Yeah, you won't go there. You just don't
yeah,
give it your energy. Like,
yeah,
it's really that simple.
yeah, it's that simple. I mean, that's why everyone's going to Texas, Texas and Florida.
Exactly. I actually used to make fun of people who moved to Texas, and now I'm moving to Texas. So
That happens a lot in life. So
it does. It does.
you're like, no,
Yeah.
never, and then it happens. But no,
Yep.
mate, it's and so you're going just outside Austin. Have you been before? Have you checked it out?
Yeah, I have a lot of friends who live in Austin. A lot of my really close friends who think similarly to you and I. So I'm really excited to be there. And then my wife's family, her sister lives there, and they have 6 kids. I have 2 kids, so we're gonna live 4 minutes away from them. They'll be able to play all the time. And my sister actually lives in Texas as well. So
No, awesome, mate. So there's lots to look forward to, lots to be busy, and lots to look forward to. So, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Alec, mate. It's been great. It's been a long time coming, but I think it's been a hell of a conversation. And hopefully next time, what I'm planning on doing actually is try to bring these interviews face to face.
awesome.
So yeah, I'm gonna try and be doing that. So this is my next thing for this year. Well, the rest of the year is like trying to do that. So just jumping on a
Come
plane.
visit me in Texas, man. We can get it done. That'd be awesome.
Brilliant, mate. Thanks. Anything else you want to add? Like, what's the website for Health Freedom for Humanity?
Yeah, so it's healthfreedomforhumanity.org, and I would say follow me on Instagram or Twitter, but I keep getting deleted from both of those.
Even with
So
the disguises, you keep
even
getting.
with the disguises, yeah, it's nuts. So follow me on Telegram. That's probably the best way to keep in touch with me, and that's t.me/, the way forward. And forward is spelled FWRD. So if you just type in on your browser t.me/, the way forward, again, forward is spelled FWRD. You can find me there. That's where I'm most active.
Perfect. And then any other? You said any other websites for any of the other information? Like where's this video going to go at the presentation? Where will that be? Will that be?
Oh yeah, that's going to be distributed via like 8 to 10 channels. Because there's 5 of us who are doing it together, so it's going to be distributed everywhere. So I'll be sure to send that to you once we release it.
Awesome, my man. And I'll get it out to my audience. Alex, it's been an absolute pleasure. Have a great rest of the day, and I'll speak to you soon, man.
Thanks, brother. Thanks for having me, Ryan.